At 4:47 in the afternoon, on the top floor of a glass tower in downtown Chicago, an 11-year-old boy named Marcus Webb noticed something that 4 executives, 2 lawyers, and 1 billionaire had all missed. It was a smell, faint, almost sweet, coming from a coffee cup that had been sitting on the boardroom table for exactly 6 minutes. Marcus didn't know yet that the next 10 seconds would decide whether the man across the table lived to see his granddaughter's birthday party that weekend. He just knew something was wrong. Have you ever walked into a room and felt, before anyone said a word, that something was off? Marcus felt that, and this time he didn't stay quiet. Stick around, what happens next isn't the story you're expecting. This channel is about the moments that don't make the news, the quiet ones, the ones where an ordinary person, often someone the world barely notices, ends up being the only one paying attention when it matters most. Today's story is about a boy, a cleaning cart, and a boardroom on the 42nd floor. Let's get into it. Marcus Webb sat on a rolling cart of cleaning supplies outside conference room 42C at 4:41 p.m. on a Thursday in October, doing his math homework by the light of the hallway, because his mother's shift didn't end until 6, and there was nowhere else for him to be. Marcus was 11 years old, in the 6th grade at Kenwood Academy, and he came to his mother's job most Thursdays because his after-school program let out at 4, and his mom, Denise Webb, worked as a member of the night cleaning crew for Halbrook Tower, a 52-story office building owned in large part by a man named Arthur Kessler. Denise had worked there for 6 years. She kept a photo of Marcus taped inside her supply cart, next to a laminated card with the building's emergency numbers. She always told Marcus the same thing before her shift started: sit here, do your homework, don't touch anything, don't wander. Marcus had heard those words so many times he could recite them in his sleep. He was small for his age, quiet, the kind of kid teachers described as notices everything on report cards, though nobody had ever really tested what that meant outside of a classroom. He liked chess. He liked taking things apart. He noticed when the elevator music changed, when a light bulb in the hallway flickered slightly different from the others, when his mother's voice sounded tired in a specific way that meant her feet hurt. That Thursday had started like every other Thursday. Marcus finished school at 3, walked 4 blocks to the community center for his after-school program, ate a granola bar someone's mom had donated in bulk, and got picked up by his mother's coworker Teresa at 4:15, since Denise's shift on the executive floors didn't let her leave the building. He rode the freight elevator up with Teresa, who always let him press the button for floor 42, even though he knew the code by heart now. He found his usual spot in the hallway outside the big glass conference room, unfolded his math worksheet on his knees, and started on fractions. Through the glass wall, he could see 6 people sitting around a long table, 3 men in suits he didn't recognize, 2 women with laptops open in front of them, and at the head of the table, Arthur Kessler, who Marcus knew because his photo was in the lobby, and because his mother sometimes mentioned him, always carefully, the way people talk about weather that could turn bad. A young assistant named Priya had brought in a tray of coffee about 10 minutes earlier. Marcus remembered because Priya had smiled at him on her way past and said, "Still doing homework, Professor," the way she always did. Everything was ordinary. Everything was exactly like the last 30 Thursdays before it. At 4:44, Marcus looked up from his fractions because the air near the conference room door had changed. He couldn't have explained it to an adult in those words. What he noticed, in the way an 11-year-old notices things without naming them, was a smell drifting out through the small gap where the glass door hadn't fully clicked shut. It was sweet, almost like almonds, but underneath something sharper, something that reminded him of the cleaning supplies on his mother's cart, the ones with the skull symbol on the label that she always kept in a locked drawer. He looked at the coffee cups on the table. 5 of the 6 people had cups in front of them that were half empty, the normal kind of half empty from people talking and sipping. One cup, the one in front of Arthur Kessler, was still full to the rim, untouched, and it was the one nearest the door, nearest to Marcus. Marcus went back to his homework. He told himself it was nothing. Rich people probably had all kinds of fancy coffee that smelled strange, but he kept glancing back at that cup every 30 seconds or so, the way you check on something you're not sure you actually saw. At 4:45, any of the men in suits, a man Marcus didn't know, stood up to refill his water at the small side table near the door, the same side table where the coffee tray had been left. Marcus watched him glance at Kessler's untouched cup, then look toward the door, then sit back down without saying anything. It was such a small thing, a glance. But Marcus's mother had taught him, without ever meaning to teach it directly, how to read small things, because in a building like this, small things were sometimes all a cleaning woman was allowed to notice out loud. At 4:46, Arthur Kessler reached for the cup. The first wrong thing was the smell, and Marcus had already noticed that. The second wrong thing happened when Kessler's hand closed around the cup and Marcus saw, through the glass, that the coffee's surface had a faint, oily sheen to it, the kind of thing you'd only catch if the light hit it exactly right, which it did, because the afternoon sun was coming in low through the west-facing windows at that hour. Marcus had seen that same oily sheen once before, when his mother spilled a bottle of floor stripper on a dark tile, and it caught the light the same way before she wiped it up, telling him, "Don't ever touch that stuff, Marcus, not even a drop." The third wrong thing was the fastest and the worst. Kessler lifted the cup 2 inches off the table, and the man who had refilled his water, the one who'd glanced at the door, suddenly said, "Too loud, too fast. Arthur, wait, let me get you a fresh one that's probably gone cold," and reached across the table in a way that looked helpful but wasn't quite natural, wasn't quite timed right, like a man trying to solve a problem he had caused. Marcus was already standing. He didn't remember deciding to stand. His homework slid off his lap onto the hallway floor. He pushed open the conference room door, which was against every rule his mother had ever given him, and said the only thing his 11-year-old brain could put together fast enough to matter. "Sir, don't drink that. Something's wrong with your coffee." The room went silent in the specific way a room goes silent when a child says something no child should know to say. Arthur Kessler set the cup down. He was 71 years old, and in 50 years of business, he had learned to trust exactly two kinds of warnings, the ones that came with data and the ones that came from people who had absolutely nothing to gain by lying. A boy from the cleaning crew's family, standing in a doorway he wasn't supposed to be in, fit only the second category, and it was the category Kessler had learned, the hard way, decades ago, never to ignore. "Why do you say that, son?" Kessler asked, and his voice was steady, the way a man's voice gets steady right before he decides something matters. Marcus's heart was going so hard he could feel it in his ears. "It smells like almonds, like the stuff on my mom's cart with the skull on it, and it looks oily. My mom's coworker's coffee doesn't look like that." He pointed at Priya's abandoned cup on the side table, which had a completely ordinary matte brown surface, nothing like the sheen on Kessler's cup. The room moved fast after that. One of the women with a laptop, who turned out to be the company's head of security liaison, was already dialing a number. The man who had reached across the table, the one who'd wanted a fresh cup poured, stood up too quickly, said something about needing air, and was stopped at the door by a security guard who had arrived faster than anyone expected, because Priya, without a word to anyone, had hit a silent alarm the moment Marcus said the word wrong. It came out over the following 2 weeks slowly, through statements and lab reports and a very quiet internal investigation, that the man's name was Daniel Reyes, a contractor on the deal being discussed that afternoon, a deal that stood to lose him nearly $11 million if Kessler killed it, which Kessler had told 2 people privately he intended to do. The coffee had been tampered with using a substance the lab report described in clinical language Marcus would never fully understand, but that his mother, reading the news article months later at their kitchen table, would describe in one sentence. That coffee would have killed him before the ambulance made it 3 blocks. Nobody in that boardroom, not the lawyers, not the executives, not Kessler himself, had noticed the smell, the sheen, or the strange timing of a man reaching for a fresh cup. The person who noticed was a 6th grader doing fractions in a hallway because his mother couldn't afford childcare, and because nobody had ever told him that noticing things wasn't his job. Arthur Kessler did not die that Thursday. He went home to his wife, and the following weekend he did make it to his granddaughter's birthday party, where, according to Denise Webb, he apparently told the story of the boy who saved my life to an Yon who would listen, embarrassing his granddaughter thoroughly. What Kessler did next mattered more than the story itself. He didn't send flowers. He didn't write a check and call it closed, though he did quietly cover 4 years of Marcus's future school tuition, a fact Denise didn't learn about until a letter arrived from Kenwood Academy the following spring. What Kessler actually did was smaller, and in its own way, bigger. He asked Denise Webb, directly in his own office, what she thought the company should change about how it treated the cleaning staff and their families. He asked because a boy who was never supposed to be in that room had just proven to him that attention doesn't come with a job title attached to it, and that ignoring a person because of what floor they mop is a kind of blindness of business, and a person can't always afford. Marcus still does his homework in that same hallway most Thursdays. He says he still checks the coffee. Have you ever been in a room where you noticed something everyone else missed and had to decide whether it was your place to say something? That's the story of Marcus Webb, an 11-year-old boy who was never supposed to matter to the people in that boardroom, and who ended up mattering more than any of them that afternoon. Stories like this don't usually make the news, because the people they happen to don't usually have anyone writing it down for them. That's part of why we tell them here. If a story like this reached you today, take 30 seconds and think about who in your own life notices the small things nobody else does, and whether you've ever told them it matters. If you want more stories like this one, quiet stories about people who show up right when it counts, stick around and subscribe. We'll have another one for you soon. Until then, take care of yourselves and take care of the people who take care of the little things.